turning them to Genesis chapter 40. It is good to be back with you in Genesis and excited to get to this morning's message. Grateful for Pastor Alex filling in the last couple weeks and delivering the goods to you. And we're excited to be back here now looking at Joseph together. I want to set the stage this morning for the text and try to communicate why I think the narrator included this segment of Joseph's, really God's interpretation of these two dreams for these two gentlemen, why he placed it here. Some people wonder why he put it here. I think in one sense, as we get to next week's study, Lord willing, you'll see that Joseph gets elevated to, by God's grace, interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And so this sort of sets the stage for him doing that next week. But I think in a more significant way than just the storyline, I think God is ministering to his people, Israel, who first heard this told, in a way that's trying to get them to see how to live life well when Genesis 12 seems to be not happening. Now, what do I mean by Genesis 12? I could go back to Genesis 3. It's essentially the same message. Genesis 3, Genesis 12, it's the message that keeps reverberating throughout the scriptures like a ripple effect. And what God is effectively saying is, I'm going to make it all better. So, I'm going to make, as Sally Lloyd-Jones would say, every sad thing come untrue. That's what God promises to do. He's going to crush the serpent's head. What does the serpent do? The serpent, according to Jesus in John, he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's what Satan's come to do. So that has itself sent reverberations all through planet Earth. And as the Christmas song sings, God's going to undo the curse as far as the curse is found. So the curse is sort of this illustration. We were at the golf retreat this weekend, and there's these trees that have thorns like this long, just massive clusters of thorns. And you look at that and you say, God's going to undo that. God's going to undo every sad thing in this world. He's going to turn it upside down. That's essentially the essence of Genesis 3:15, the essence of Genesis 12, 1 through 3. He's going to make every sad thing come untrue. So if whatever you're sad about is a right thing to be sad about, it's going to come untrue. A great passage, I think, that typifies this, at least for me, it's something that comes to my mind, is something that we went through a book of the Bible each Sunday night for a few years. This passage hit me anew. It's from Zechariah 8. And God is sort of giving this picture to Israel of a coming day that he's going to restore all things. And in that coming day, he says it will be a time when the older folks will be able to sit in the street with their staff. And he says children will be playing in the streets. And that just ministered to me that God loved something that I love. God loves a neighborhood as such where children can play in the streets. And it's this picture of there's just nothing to worry about. It's just this wonderful sort of picturesque moment where everybody is just enjoying life. God's on the throne. He's where he should be. And he's not just where he should be physically. He's where he should be in our hearts. Where we want God to be on the throne. We're enjoying God on the throne. We're enjoying life in sort of this neighborhood barbecue setting. And we're all just having fun. It's just the way God intended it to be. This perfect order. And he says, a day's coming like that. But today's text essentially asks the question, well, what does life, or what should a Christian, what should a follower of God look like when the days aren't like that? What are we supposed to look like then? When nothing seems to be coming true, when all the sad things are very real and very true, so thick you could cut them with a knife. What about those times? When there seems to be this break, this interim, this silence from God, this absence of His presence, what do you do then? I think God put Genesis 40 to show you how Joseph, by his grace, is going to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, but I think he also gave us this passage and gave Israel this passage to say, this is what I want you to look like, people, when those dreams seem to be a joke and seem to be very unrealistic and most definitely unfulfilled. This is what I want you to look like. What do we know about Joseph at this point in life? Well, Genesis 37 explains that Joseph was 17 years of age when he was sold into slavery. So he's a 17-year-old boy. It also explains from the text that in 41, chapter 41, we learn that Joseph is promoted to second leader in Egypt at age 30. So that leaves us 13 years to split somehow between the time that he was a leader in Potiphar's house and a time that he was in jail for supposedly taking advantage of Potiphar's wife, which we know he didn't do. So 13 years. How do you split those up? How many years of that 13 was he in Potiphar's household? And how many years of that 13 years was he in the prison? Well, we know from the end of this text that he was surely in the prison from age 28 to age 30. So now we have to ask, okay, from age 17 to age 28, how many years was he in the prison and how many years was he in Potiphar's house? And the text doesn't answer that. So he's got 11 years that we don't know. How long was he in prison before the cupbearer and the chief baker were put in prison with him? We don't have that answer. But we know he was there at least 2 years because that's how long it was before the cupbearer remembered him. One commentator closes this chapter, his interpretive comments on this chapter, by saying this: and there he, Joseph, stays in prison for another 2 years. And I want you to catch how he closes his interpretive comments. To all appearances, forgotten by man and God. This appears to be the situation where Joseph sat. He's in prison, and he appears to be, by all appearances, forgotten by man and God. And the question we want to answer this morning is, how do you respond? How do you respond when all of His promises aren't quite working out in your life the way you thought they would? That's the question. And of course, I have my stuff that I would like to work out a certain way in my life, in my family, or in marriage, or in the church, or in the weather, or in how my meal turns out. Every single thing, of course, Ben has expectations and hopes for how it turns out. What does Ben do when they don't turn out that way? These are the sorts of questions that I need to answer when I come to this text and that you need to answer when you come to this text. You see, Joseph's in a spot where he's got the promises of his dad and his ancestors. He's got the promises that God says it's all going to work out. It's all going to turn out well. But he's got more promises than that. He's got specific promises as to how that's going to happen. He's got further revelation than just the promises of his father and his grandpa and his great-grandpa. What does Joseph have? Well, Joseph has some dreams. 2 dreams, in fact. And as it's understood in this time, 2 dreams are like a nail that is totally embedded. In other words, it's going to happen. 2 dreams are incredibly relied upon in the ancient times. When you have 2 successive dreams that are relatively around the same thing, it's like gonna happen. Well, he's got 2 around the same thing, and that thing is his brothers and even his parents bowing down to him somehow, some way, some fashion. Now, I want you just to take those dreams and look at Joseph's current circumstances and ask, Joseph, do you think those dreams are anywhere close to happening right now? And Joseph would have to answer, well, I mean, I haven't seen my family that's supposed to be the ones bowing down to me in like years, 11 years. I haven't even seen them. I don't know if they're alive or dead. I have no idea. And the sort of interviewer saying, and they're supposed to bow down to you? Is that what the dream? Yep. You haven't seen them? No. You don't know if they're alive? No, I don't. Okay. All right. Bow down. That seems to mean that you're going to have a high position, correct? It seems like that, Joseph would respond. Okay. You're supposed to be in a high position. Where are you at right now? What indentions do you have on your wrists and your ankles? Because from the Psalms we learn that when he wasn't serving people, he was shackled. He was in bonds. He'd say, well, I have markings from the bonds that I'm in. Okay, so these 2 guys that you're going to interpret these dreams for are really disheveled because they can't have access to someone who interprets the dreams, because it was like a PhD position in that day. They don't even have access to these people to interpret dreams. So how are you ever going to get access in prison for your family to come in here and bow down to you? And he says, yeah, it's probably not going to be in prison. It won't happen here, probably. You say, Joseph, could you be further away from these dreams being fulfilled as it is right now where you're at? And one thing Joseph's got, one thing he could say is, well, I am in the king's prison. I'm not just in the common prison, I'm in the king's prison, I'm in Pharaoh's prison. So the point is that Joseph, largely speaking, is at a point in life where the dreams, the revelation that God's given him, the promise that he's given him, that everything is going to work out and this is the way it's going to work out, they seem to be failing. They seem to be unfulfilled totally, if not largely. And this is where Joseph's at. He's got this revelation that doesn't seem to be happening. And I want to point out at this point why this makes it so unbelievably incredible that Joseph responds to the cupbearer and the chief baker the way he does when he goes to minister to them. Because if you're like me, when the cloud of pain is over your life, you tend, at least I tend, to become a very inwardly focused person. When I'm going through pain in my life, I sort of verbally vomit that pain on anybody within earshot that's willing to listen for a while. A very good picture of this that you might understand if you haven't understood what I just said is, if you haven't been a drowning victim, or if you've seen someone that's drowning, and someone goes out to that person to save them from drowning, if that victim that's in the midst of drowning has any strength left in them by the time the rescuer gets to them, what does that drowning victim tend to begin doing? Drowning the person that's in the midst of trying to save them. And that's a very picturesque view of what we tend to be like in our pain. We tend to be incredibly self-focused. And self seems to take priority over all others. The ego eclipses all else. All we can see is us. And if there's even just a lead-in from what someone else says to us about that has anything to do, that it could even somehow have a thread attached to our pain, we can use that as an opportunity to say, let me tell you about this. That tends to be how we are. But amazingly, Joseph, in his dark valley, does not seem to be like that. He comes in to wait on these two gentlemen, and he says to them effectively, why are your faces bad? Why are your faces ra'ah? Why are they bad? You got a bad face today. Why? It's pretty incredible that a person in as dark a place as Joseph was in is able to be others focused. I've shared with you before when Finn and I went to visit Ray Johnson in his later days, and Finn, as a little boy, began playing with the bed of Ray Johnson, and he began getting pushed up. And in a frantic, I tried to stop Finn, and Ray let me have it for not letting Finn play with his bed. And so Ray went up and down, up and down, up and down. And this is a person that in the midst of a dark valley is completely others focused. And this is who Joseph appears to be. And you got to ask, how? How was Joseph this way? And I want to give to you two terms here, two phrases that I think at least help me work through how Joseph was this way. I think it's very possible for believers to live their faith in what I would call a resigned faith. Everybody say, resigned faith. Now, how I would describe a resigned faith is a person that does the right thing because it's the right thing, but they don't really believe that it's going to do anything. They just, all right, I'll do what God wants me to do, but I'm going to do it angry because I don't believe it's going to do anything. It doesn't appear to be doing anything, and so I'm just going to go through the motions and just do what I'm supposed to, but I'm going to be bitter while I do it. That's resigned faith. And it's actually not faith. It's an imposter faith. Why doesn't anybody, I've asked before, Doug Wilson asks, why doesn't anybody counterfeit brown paper bags? His answer is because they're not worth anything. So why do people counterfeit faith? Because down deep they know that there's something awesome, incredibly supernatural about faith. And so they try to make it themselves, but it's actually counterfeit. It's not real. And anybody that's close to that person knows that it's counterfeit. It's not genuine faith. Because genuine faith, what I will call reflective faith, so you've got resigned faith and then you've got reflective faith. Reflective faith is a faith that moves a little slower. It's what Pastor Alex was talking about in his devotion this weekend. Reflective faith moves a little slower, and it pays attention to what God's done in the past, and it focuses on that, and it says, okay, if God did this stuff in the past, if I sense God's presence with me right now, even though everything's not the way I want it to be, I'm going to trust Him in this moment. This is Joseph. And I'm going to have a positive, hopeful, optimistic response to this dark valley I am, because, as David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. My cup overflows. This is the idea. So you ask, how did Joseph respond the way he did? How did he have others' eyes when he'd have every reason in the book to be self-focused? Well, I think that answer was answered in Genesis 39. In Genesis 39, listen, the Lord is mentioned 8 times in this one chapter. And listen the way it's mentioned. Genesis 39:2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. Genesis 39:3. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. 39:5. From the time that he made him an overseer in his house over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and field. 39:21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. 39:23. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Do you see? Joseph was able to have a positive response to the dark valley that he was in because he felt in his bones and in his gut, God's with me. God's with me. Yes, the circumstances are not what I want. I want out. I want out of this pit. But God's with me here. I want the dream fulfilled for His glory, not my own. It might have started as my own, but I want it for His glory. But He's with me. And His presence is enough. He had reflective faith. When Paul says, work out your own salvation, which is essentially your salvation life with God, your Christianity, work out your Christianity with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to work for His good pleasure. For it is God who is working in you right now, Joseph. And he says, I get it. I get it. Because God's working in me, because I know He's with me, I can actually see others. I can see them. And because I can see them, I can minister to them instead of just looking to be ministered to. I can minister to them. I shared with the men on our way up to Get You Work Week a couple weeks ago a parable of sorts that I heard on heaven and hell. And it's just a parable. It's just kind of something to get you thinking, but I think it does a pretty decent job. And I may have shared it with you before. It said, I'm paraphrasing it, essentially a man brings a guy to 2 doors, and one of the doors has heaven written on it, and one of the doors has hell written on it. And so the man's curious. He wants to look in behind each door to see what it looks like. And so he opens the hell door, and in this room he sees a big group of people, and he sees in the middle of the room this giant bowl of soup, enough soup to feed every single person in the room. The problem is that every person in the room is carrying this really abnormally long spoon. A spoon so long that if you scoop soup and you try to feed yourself with it, it can't get to your mouth. And so as a result, everybody in the room is gaunt, skinny, grim-looking, death-looking, like a horror sort of picture. And so he shuts the door. He goes over to heaven. He opens the heaven door, and it's the exact same setup. Same amount of people, same bowl of soup, same long spoons. But everybody's happy, everybody's healthy, everybody's of a healthy weight. Everything looks great in there. The only difference, really, between the 2 rooms is the fact that in heaven, everybody's feeding each other. And this is essentially what God brings about. Cups overflow with God. They overflow. And as a result of God overflowing my cup, I'm able to minister to other people, to minister to their cups, so to speak, through God's grace. So this is the deal. This is who Joseph is. Because God's been ministering to him, he is able to minister to others, even in a dark valley. God's all over Joseph's life. He knows it, so he can minister to these 2 men. But the ante gets upped. And here's how. He says to them, why are your faces downcast? Why are you so sad? And they say, well, we've had dreams. Now this is important. Why is Joseph where he's at? Well, we know expressly, the text tells us, that as he's coming to his brothers, they say, we'll take care of that dream and we'll see what happens to his dreams. So, Joseph's where he's at because of dreams. And in those dreams said that he's going to be elevated, which he's totally not right now. And so here's the crux. You might think that Joseph says, hey guys, I would love to help you with your dreams, but I seem to have a problem with interpreting dreams. You see, my dream says that I'm supposed to be on top of the world, but I seem to be in a pit right now. So you might want to get John down in cell block C to interpret your dreams because I'm not the guy. That's what he would have done if he still didn't believe his dreams were in the process of coming true. But because Joseph believes that his dreams are in the process of coming true, he's not weak-kneed when he hears the word dreams. He's not embittered. He doesn't have a lack of confidence. He has an overabundance in confidence. This was something that only the magicians dealt with. These two men understood how the process went. When Pharaoh had dreams, he brought in his magicians. We'll see him do it next week. This was something they handled. And Joseph says, look. It is understanding of the dreams in ancient times that the dream realm was the closest realm you'd ever have with the gods. That was kind of the idea. And he says, look, if God's the one that gave you the dream, can't God enable an interpretation? So tell me the dream and God will do it. What that tells you is that Joseph had still, in this dark valley, absolute, total confidence that his dreams were still in his trajectory. It's incredible. It's awesome. That in the darkest place, he knows that God's real and that his promises are still intact. And as a result of that, he can minister to these two guys. It's pretty awesome. It is pretty incredible. In fact, he's so confident that that God's interpretation through him of these dreams is going to come true that he says to the cupbearer, and when you do get out, because you will, remember me. That's how confident Joseph is that it's going to happen. We see this throughout the scriptures. In one instance, we see Jesus with Lazarus in the tomb. And Jesus is motivated by the Father, by the Spirit. Somehow, he knows that God's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Now, if that were you or me, and we knew that God, we had this strong intuition that God's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, we might have said, like kind of in a mumble, hey God, have Lazarus hit on the tomb and then I'll open the tomb. God, do that, please. So that no one else hears what we think God's up to. Instead, Jesus says, while Lazarus is still dead, roll away the stone. In other words, somebody's coming out of this tomb. So it's all on the table. And this is how we see God's people respond to God. Joseph is so confident that it's going to happen that he says, when you get out, you tell him. Now, of course, there's a question. When Joseph says to this cupbearer, when you get out, remember me. And the actual words he says, it's very pointed. He says, remember me and show me steadfast love. Show me hesed is the word. It's a very important word throughout the Bible. Show me steadfast love. Now, you might ask the question, at that point, was Joseph over-relying on his own strength in telling, pleading with the cupbearer to remember him? Was Joseph sort of leaning on the cupbearer too much? Here would be my answer to that. Proverbs tells us that God alone weighs the heart. And so if Joseph was over-relying on the cupbearer, my personal belief is that if there was even an ounce of that, 2 whole more years in prison would have been God's way to lower the sun on that, to burn away any dross in Joseph's request. But only God knows if there was. If there was any over-reliance on him when he did it, I believe that God would be slowly, steadily ministering to Joseph. Joseph, my steadfast love is always following you. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, even in the day that the darkest imaginable thing befalls me. Goodness and mercy are within touching distance. So we get to the dreams. The cupbearer's dream, the baker's dream, they're very similar. They each have the common element of 3 branches on the vine, 3 baskets on his head. They're each in the realm of their respective services. The cupbearers involved with cupbearing, the bakers involved with bread. Beyond that, Pharaoh's name is both mentioned. So there are some common elements in each dream, but there are also some differences, and these differences are very significant. First, we see the cupbearer actually involved in his practice. He's involved in his vocation. He's carrying a cup in his hand. He's crushing grapes. He's serving Pharaoh. Whereas the chief baker, even though he's in the realm of his service, he's with bread, it's largely out of his control. The bread is on his head. There's birds eating the bread, which he seems to not be able to fix. He can't fix that problem, it seems like, in his dream. And different than the cupbearer, whereas the cupbearer is actually with Pharaoh, the baker is not with Pharaoh. And of course, these differences become understood when Joseph interprets the dream that the cupbearer will be elevated back into Pharaoh's presence, whereas the chief baker will not be with Pharaoh and instead will be executed. But I want you to see something in this. I want you to see God's goodness even in the carrying out of these sentences, or the lifting of one and the carrying out of the other. Whether they were righteous or not, these 2 men are ostensibly, they offended Pharaoh some way. Maybe it was found out that the cupbearer's offense was not his thing, it was something else. Maybe the chief baker did find out to be actually offending Pharaoh and it was proven, and so this is the result. We're not told the details. But what we do see from this is that here's Joseph with his dreams totally unfulfilled or largely unfulfilled. But God's interpretation through him of the cupbearer and the baker, his interpretation is fulfilled in them. That's another moment where God's nudging Joseph and saying, Joseph, do you see? Because you're going to be here wasting away for 2 more years. I want you to see that the interpretations I give you are accurate. They're true. And even though these 2 years are going to seem incredibly long, I want you to see in this immediate 3-day fulfillment that I am not messing around with you. That I am a God who keeps my promises. And I'm also a God that a day to me is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day, and my thoughts are not your thoughts. And so it's not going to work out just the way you envisioned, but it will work out. Hang on me, Joseph. Rely on me, stick with me, and let these immediate fulfillments bolster your fledgling confidence, son. That's the idea. Joseph had reflective faith. And if his faith was fledgling at that moment, he largely had reflective. It shows up in the text. And what I want to encourage you with this morning is I want to encourage you with this awesome truth that Joseph's faith, catch this, was not of his making. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an illustration. This weekend on the golf retreat, I was talking with Jeff Phillips, and Jeff is a bow hunter. And in the midst of talking to Jeff, I learned about a mechanism, and I'll probably mangle it all up in my description of it, but it's a specially designed release mechanism that lets go of the bowstring without using the fingers on the bowstring, that lets it go perfectly so that it gives a direct shot of the arrow. It doesn't mess with the trajectory of the arrow at all. It's a trigger mechanism. And I began thinking, I was working on the sermon, I began thinking, what if I were a bow hunter for years? And what if I was hearing about this mechanism for the very first time? And I had spent years bow hunting and dealt with the inaccuracy of my fingers and heard of this and said, man, that could revolutionize my hunting. My first thought might be, well, this is something that Jeff built. This is something unique to him. This is something that I don't have access to. It's privatized. And these thoughts, as they're flooding through my brain, out of those thoughts, Jeff says to me, yeah, I bought it from this distributor over here. It's in Davenport. You can go pick one up. They're around. I don't have to figure it. I can just go buy one. It's available. What I want to tell you this morning is that what you see in Joseph is not unique to Joseph. It's not privatized to Joseph. He's not the author of it. He's not the distributor. Listen to Hebrews 12. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Who is Jesus? The author and the perfecter of faith. Jesus invented and completed faith. He's the Alpha and the Omega of faith. He's the beginning and the end. He is the faith inventor, engineer. He's the one. He's the distributor. He is the one that you can go to and say, hey, Jesus, I want what Joseph has. Because I am sick and tired of being a hot mess when life goes bad. I'm tired of it. My family's tired of it. My friends are tired of it. My boss is tired of it. Everybody's tired of it. So can you give me whatever Joseph had? And Jesus says, I'm happy to do it. He's inviting you to come to him. And he will give you all the promises that Joseph had. That's the idea. Jesus is the author. When we see Joseph respond the way he did to the cupbearer and the chief baker, we see Jesus do the same things. Joseph was in a dark valley. No question. We all agree. Jesus was in the darkest valley. Jesus was bearing the greatest weight ever humanly carried. It was on him. There was no darker valley than Gethsemane. And as Jesus is carrying the greatest weight in all the world to ever be placed upon a human, Jesus consistently cares for his disciples and the people around him. He tells his disciples at the Last Supper that one of them is going to betray him, so that they're not shocked when Judas does. But he doesn't tell them Judas' name because they might stop Judas. See? But he tells them, one of you is going to betray me. So don't freak out when it happens. Don't act like things are spinning out of control, because they're not. But I won't tell you who it is because otherwise I can't accomplish my mission. He's caring for others when he does that. When he's apprehended in Gethsemane, he tells the guards, let these other men go. You want me. You don't want them. Who's he thinking about? Himself? No, he's thinking about his disciples. He tells Peter that you're going to deny me 3 times so that when Peter does, he'll know that Jesus still loves him because he says, but I've prayed for you, Peter. In his darkest hour, the darkest hour any human has ever experienced, he's praying for Peter. He says, I've prayed for you that after you've fallen, you'll be raised up and be restored and minister to your brothers. Minister to my sheep. So he prays for him, but it's not just that. In the midst of his interrogation, as he's being marched into interrogation, the rooster crows the 3rd time. Jesus is thinking about Peter right now, not himself. He's about to experience a grisly death. He's thinking about Peter. Rooster crows. The Gospels tell us that he turned and he found Peter and he looked at him in that moment to minister to Peter as he's facing the worst moment of his life, of any person's life. Even when he's being crucified, he's pleading with the Father to not hold the ultimate offense against his executioners because they don't accurately understand what they're doing. And he's pleading with God, don't execute what should be done from appearance sake because they don't really know who I am. This is your Savior. This is the faith that's at your disposal. It's for you. It's there for the taking. Joseph took it. Will you? He's not just caring for others. Joseph demonstrates great confidence in the promises of God. When he hears the word dream, he demonstrates great confidence. He doesn't think God's dreams are failing, neither does Jesus. Mark 14, by all appearances, the high priest seems to have control over Jesus' fate. It says, Mark records, the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But he remained silent and made no answer, Mark writes. And the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said to him, here's the confidence. I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. By all appearances, Jesus' jig is up based on the high priest. Jesus says jig's not up. The dream will be fulfilled. You will see me. To Pilate, Pilate actually says to Jesus, will you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you? Jesus responds with boldness, you would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. This is the absolute, unshakable confidence that Jesus had in the unshakable revelation of his Father. This is reflective faith at the darkest hour. Jesus remembering when the thunder rang out from heaven, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. God the Father encouraged Jesus all his life so that he comes to this darkest valley and he can do it with total confidence. No resigned faith whatsoever. Becky and I have a friend from college named Chrissy. She's our age, and she has a little girl named Emily who passed away this year. She's our little Judah's age from neuroblastoma. And I want to read to you this year's Mother's Day post from her. If someone were to ask me how many children I have, my reply is still 3. 2 at home and 1 in heaven. Emily's death did not change the fact that I'm her mom. My job, an absolute privilege,
of being her mom is just on hold. She went through the door ahead of me and is in the loving arms of my Heavenly Father. One day, when God sees fit, He will call me home to heaven too. Then my job will resume as Emily's mama, and I'll never have to let go again. Thankful for the hope and promise I have in Christ. Catch this. If anyone wants to know more about how they can have that hope too, I would count it a privilege and an honor to talk with you. Though this Mother's Day was difficult, I was reminded of the numerous blessings and wonderful memories I do have. This is reflective faith. And reflective faith allows a mom mourning over the loss of her daughter and rejoicing in the truth of God's promises, allows her to reach out to anybody in her network that doesn't know Christ and minister to them. This is a Joseph, Jesus moment that in the darkest imaginable pain for most of us, she can reach out and invite others to be ministered to by her in potentially the greatest grief. Reflective faith, the faith of Jesus, created by Him, engineered by Him, perfected by Him, that in the utmost pain allows a person to be able to reach out and minister to others with the rock-solid belief in a rock-solid God who only makes promises that He intends to keep. Amen? I'll ask the musicians to come.